and I'm delighted to welcome you all. Here we're at a Child's Gallery virtual exhibition introduction and artist discussion. We have John Thompson, Robert Freeman, and Nona Hershey. The title of the exhibition is called John Thompson, An Artist Collects. And this is our first exhibition in our new space. We've moved across the street from 169 Newbury Street. We're now at 168 Newbury Street and fully functional in the new space. Before we get started with the program, I just want to give you the few standard Zoom announcements that all of you are well familiar with at this time. We're going to ask that you stay on mute during the presentation. The audience may submit questions via the chat feature during the presentation, and we will be answering these at the end. And just to note that the exhibition is on view at the gallery, and we are open. We're open from 11 to 4, and I believe we can have as many as 10 people in the gallery at a time. So with that, I'm going to share my screen and show you some images of the exhibition and then introduce the artists for their discussion. Okay, so John Thompson, An Artist Collects. It explores the connection between an artist's work and the work that he's inspired by and collects. So this exhibition features the artwork of John Thompson and work from his personal collection. It's an opportunity to see the work in context. One of the things that I've always thought of as someone who deals in the selling of art is that many of us come to it as collectors. I like to think that collectors are born and not made. I had mentioned to the artists earlier that I believe that most people that end up becoming art collectors are people that had some sort of collection when they were younger as a child, usually before the teenage years. My collection were bottle caps. I know lots of people that had stamp collections and doll collections and baseball card collections. And I think some of you may know that the most requested collection to see at the Metropolitan Museum of Art is their baseball collection. So I think that collecting is just extremely influential to an artist's work. So John Thompson is an accomplished painter, printmaker, and educator. He's also a lifelong collector. His eclectic art collection, assembled over several decades, comprises more than 1,000 works, spanning examples of paintings and prints from old master through contemporary. John's collection and this show also features work of many of the contemporary artists that he collects. And this evening, we'll be joined by Robert Freeman and Nona Hershey, very much accomplished artists in their own right. And they will have a lively discussion about the nature of collecting in relation to their own artwork. And it's an opportunity to hear three artists together discussing what they do. So I'm just going to go through a quick example, a quick few slides of the exhibition itself to let you see, and then we'll turn it over to the artists. So you can see John's work is in the center. That's a Jim Dine on one side on the left, and then Walton Ford all the way over, Kevin Whitman on the right. John Walker in the back. That's a Robert Freeman on the far right. So now, John, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you talk, and you can tell me when to change the slide. You might want to take yourself off mute. Yep.
Thank you, everybody. So nice to see you all. It's a little overwhelming. So the idea that this exhibition came out, Richard, I've shown with Childs, and I'm delighted with the friendship and relationship. Um, but there came a point where I suddenly realized that my passion for collecting might saddle my children with more than they could possibly be interested in or could manage. So I started talking with Richard about the idea of possibly deaccessioning some things. And it's not working very well because I keep purchasing as much as I deaccession. But the my whole thing about collecting is that I'm just so fascinated by the touch of so many people and the different ways that people make art, the way they see things, the approaches, the personalities that come out in them. And I think it is just it's the best treat in the world to gift yourself a work of art that you can enjoy and have and look at and walk past and see different ways and different things. And at the same token, when it's time to let them go, I feel very much like they're, you know, my wonderful children. It's time to let them go. They're off on their own and doing other things. So Richard put up a couple examples. This is something I'm fairly well known for. I was a lousy student because I only liked the mistakes in printmaking, and I kept experimenting and trying to figure out new ways to do things and to get what I wanted. And I'm also fascinated. I consider myself a landscape painter, but I don't like, or I'm intimidated, I guess is a better expression, by sweeping landscapes, people who do big scenes and see wide visions. I've never gotten beyond just doing sort of mud puddles and what's at my feet and what's immediately there that I can comprehend. So this is an example of perhaps my meditation on a pond in the late summer afternoon when things are cooling down just before it gets dark. And I make these things, and I make them on canvas, and some of them are quite large and others are quite small. And everyone's different. What's the next one, Richard? So these are two smaller silk screens, the same kind of theme, you know, bright sunlight on the right, the August sun bouncing off the water, the one on the left, maybe autumn. And they happen in the moment. They're, you know, looking and exploring and bringing things out. The great thing about working on paper is you can always tear it up and throw away if it's not going where you want it to go. It's a great lesson for all artists. Tossing is a great thing to be able to do. And these are rather small. What else do we have, Richard? And they're great experiments for me.
Not small this time.
Yeah, this is something else I've been working on, and I'm trying to figure it out. I'm too lazy to do multiple woodcuts. So many people do a woodcut and they'll print an edition and then they're sort of done with it. What I do, and I do the same thing with my silk screens, is that I create a matrix and then I just use it over and over and over again. And if you look at my work, I probably have, I don't know, 40 blocks carved now, 50 blocks, I'm not sure. And some of them are quite big. Some of them are 4 feet tall. Some of them are 3 feet by 3 feet. They're different sizes. They're not huge because I want them to be manageable. I've got to be able to pick them up and ink them and move them around. But then I use them in multiple ways and move them and use them as rather drawing tools to achieve or to explore and see if I can achieve something. And this series was pretty happy.
I'll go on to the next one.
And this one's a great history. This is the fumbling around. I did this print a while ago and actually worked with Nona on this. She was, I was in the studio as a grad student, and it was my first big spit bite. And it's a big print. It's 35 inches tall. And I've discovered that even the most patient student working as hard as they can with good equipment is still not as good a printer as a master printer. So this led me to start working with Peter Pettengill at Wingate Studios. And this is one of the first prints of mine that he printed. I made the plate. I could not achieve a stellar print from it, and Peter did.
Now, John, this one's a little bit different than your other ones, which are primarily mono prints. You want to talk a little bit about the mono print?
Yeah, so one of the problems with the way I work is I can never, other than when I'm doing an etching or in a few cases where I do a wood block or a screen and use it to make what's called an addition, and we're happy to talk about that. All of the other work I do is monoprints. They're one-offs. They're unique. This one happens to be a series. They're about, I think we did 10 of these. So this is an edition of 10 prints.
Great. Let me go to the next one.
It's an etching. It's an intaglio spit bite. And now we go on to really, oh good, I don't have to talk anymore.
No, you'll have to.
And a lot of the work on exhibit here, you know, I have, Bob is a very close friend, and I have some of his work, but I never want to sell the work that I have. And so this is something new for Bob. So Bob, you go ahead.
Now, do you want me to talk about this painting, or do you want me to talk about my collection? Or how it
well, why don't we start? Why don't we start with this painting? Because I think we'd all like to hear your thoughts on it, and then you can just comment on how collecting has influenced your work.
Okay. Well, first, let me say thank you to Charles Gallery and John Thompson for the invitation to exhibit, and thank you for taking this really big painting. This is a painting that was born out of, well, all the paintings actually begin with a lot of scribble, and I started a new series of paintings called Our Struggle after the George Floyd murder and the insurrection at the Capitol on January 6th. So that the scribbled lines became rather violent lines at one point, although it's not reflected in this painting. The scribble turned into these figures that were looking like they were circling something, and I put the beach ball in the middle of this pool, and it reminded me of the game Marco Polo, which was two sides, teams take side in a pool, and everyone tries to capture the ball. So my intent with this was to show that the racial breakup of the teams, that everyone is either going in a circle or not catching the ball, that there was very little progress being made along the racial lines, and particularly influenced by the insurrection at the Capitol. It can be read, and it has been read by a number of other people, that it's a painting that suggests peace between African Americans and whites, and that the ball is a part of that peace. So as all art, you bring to it some of the interpretation, and I love to hear from people because it's always a surprise how it's interpreted. Again, I want to go back a little bit to the scribble part, because I never know what's going to come out. I paint really fast, and I remember, I think it was Frank Stella who said, he used a quote that Mario Andretti, the race car driver, uses, and he said, if you're still in control, you're not going fast enough. So I'm, in the beginning, I'm scribbling, and I'm scribbling all over the canvas, and I'm trying to place form and line that comes from my subconscious. And this is a painting that came absolutely from my subconscious, of course, when I realized that there were these figures that were emerging, then I focused in on water quality, the figures themselves, and tried to arrive at a good compositional painting.
I think I've never quite seen a painting of figures underwater before. You really get the sense when you stand in front of it. It's quite remarkable. And I think the size, you can't appreciate just how big the painting is. And John will take the camera around later and show it to people.
Right.
So now, I certainly, well, going back to the collecting, do you want to tell us a little bit about your collecting?
Yeah, very quickly, my parents moved to Ghana, West Africa when I was 10 years old. So I spent most of my childhood in West Africa and lived with their collection of African art. At our home here as a married adult, our home is still filled with African art and filled with the art of African Americans that I've always admired. And those are Ramar Bearden, Benny Andrews, Richard Yard, and John Wilson. And John Wilson and Richard Yard were my professors at Boston University. So I learned how to figure paint with them. I remember we were in almost 6 hours a day doing figure painting. I suspect that the African art, which is this kind of ebony dark wood on my white walls, influenced the early paintings, which were about African Americans in tuxedos with very white backgrounds. So that I was making, again, out of scribble, a abstraction of white and black, and then forming figures that were interacting with one another. So I'm guessing that I was influenced. I know I was influenced by my professors, but I also guess that I'm influenced by the black and white quality of the African art that surrounds us in our home.
Fascinating. Well, thank you. I'm going to go to the next slide, and that is Nona Hershey.
Indeed. Well, this piece I did in last summer in the height of our worrying about politics and the pandemic and constant onslaught of techno chatter. So cloud imagery is something that I've been doing for a long time, and you can see the surrounding kind of data overlook of what could be city, I suppose, just collapsing, which is what it all feels like. So I'm juxtaposing this kind of chaos with clouds. And I guess I say that my hope is that despite our ever increasing urge to connect instantaneously with things and places around us, that we don't forfeit the humble time of humble meditation of the sublime, those enigmatic sources that are so much larger than we are and uncontrollable, wind, light, and air. So I've just been mixing that. I find in these cloud drawings where I've introduced this kind of data, it's getting more and more chaotic as the world gets more and more chaotic. But that's what this piece is about. And as for collecting, I certainly have a house full of art, some that I've collected, traded with friends, and some things that I've bought, some things that were gifts. I was interested recently, I don't know if you've noticed, but in Hyperallergic, the online site, they've had regularly throughout the pandemic interviews with artists talking about pieces that are in their collection and how they're looking at them and how they're reacting to them. And I mean, I think that, we're all spending a lot more time in our homes and looking at the work that's around. I don't know that it's necessarily influenced me and how I think and work. My biggest collection is a collection of prints that I had at the school, 3 flat files full of just fabulous prints that, when I was teaching students how to do hard ground or something, I would just grab the drawer of hard ground prints and pull them out and show, how many examples of how the way that medium can be used. So it was, I think we learn with our eyes, and it was always a great way. I think other people, John, I think uses that collection too. I think it's a great resource. I was very pleased recently to read an article about Leo Steinberg. I didn't realize that he had 3,500 prints that he just gave to he sold, I think, to a museum in Austin, the Banton Museum, and they're showing them, but he had 3,500 prints. And he felt that, if you're going to study artists, you have to see what they were looking at. And so a lot of them were looking at prints, and he collected prints from, or very early prints through contemporary prints. So I'm all for that.
So one of the things that is apparent in the exhibition is, and with all three of you are educators teaching younger people about art and how to make art. And so I'm wondering if there's a back and forth between the students and yourself in the creation of the art. And John, since you picked a number of younger, very talented printmakers, so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to comment, and I'm glad to be talking about educating is I think there's also not all artists are great teachers, but for those of us who have the ability to teach or the interest to teach, I think there's a tremendous sense of generosity and spirit and giving that fuels it. And I really respect those people I've worked with and work with in just that spirit of generosity. And indeed, students can give us a ride. It was so great. I was talking about something in a critique, or I forget where it was, and one of the students really called me on it. And I cracked up. All I could do was laugh because they were so correct in that I was spouting something I forget what it was, not applicable. But we really learn from our students, and our students can be, when you get a class of students who are really enthused and are experimenting and creating and making messes and driving you absolutely nuts, gems come out of it, and it's so wonderful. I see Nona laughing because she's living the experience. I mean, it was a daily event for us, and it's it keeps you on your toes because you've got to move faster than they are, and it's really wonderful to see. And it's also wonderful to see people we've worked with coming up and experimenting and growing and trying to create their own careers, because the life of an artist, nobody in their right mind would be an artist. You've got to be driven to do it. It's very few of us are going to make a fortune doing this. We do it because there's a passion.
So John, do you want to specifically mention some of the students in the exhibition that you've had?
Yeah, and do you want me to walk around, or do you
Yeah.
have slides?
Yeah, we can do that.
Do you have some slides, Richard?
I didn't do a full.
Okay, so let me just see. I'm terrible at this, so I've got to I got to change my view here so I can at least
Does
see.
have a slide of Patrick with Kyle above him.
Oh, do you?
Wait, I do have some more actually. I'm sorry.
Okay, but let's talk about this real quickly. This is I mean, I think one of the master printmakers of our combination of a fabulous artist and a master printmaker. This is done. It's a print by Walton Ford that was printed in collaboration with Peter Pettengill at Wingate Studios. And I think it's real important that people understand that back up. I love prints, and I love prints because they're generally more approachable, more affordable. I think you see more experimenting going on in prints than you do sometimes in the other work. I think a lot of artists work out ideas in their prints, but this is an example of Walton Ford's work, and it's actually the little building in the background is the Wingate studio building on the farm in Hinsdale, New Hampshire. And this is done from it's 5 or 6 plates, copper plates. And it gets this fabulous combination of colors by the transparencies of the inks overlaying and this incredible drawing. And it's just masterful how it's done. Everything is printed in reverse. So the writing's got to be done backwards. The drawing's got to be done backwards, the reverse combinations. Peter showed a class the process, and to do one of these prints, just to get the basics, takes about 3 weeks of solid work and probably 100 sheets of paper before they get somewhere where they're happy with the print. You know, and yes, this print is not, it's not a giveaway. You got to have a few grand to get it, but you certainly can get a Walton Ford when a few of us could purchase a Walton Ford painting. And we have a couple in the gallery, which is great. This one's interesting. This was just a tour de force for me. This was printed by, again, master printer Jim Stroud. And this is Roger Tibbetts. And it's, again, I just like it because it's a very different perspective on printmaking. Contrast the two we've just looked at and what this is. This is a single plate inked up with a Shinkale in the middle. And I could talk the techniques for a while, but even his drawing tools were kind of interesting. The bottom line has those dark spots, and that was done with a nail punch onto the copper plate. So just kind of interesting ways of working and talking about experimentation. And Jim Dine, masterful artist, obviously, beautiful drawing. This was done on a big, I believe on a big stone, and just, I loved the drawing and happened across this and just thought it was great to have, but it's a pretty big print and there's no wall space. So somebody else can enjoy it. On these two, I really like, this David Rowe, an artist I really like. He's printing right now with Suomi, among other printers. And these are monotypes, and I just love the transparency and the freedom in these. I thought they were just really well done drawings that I purchased a bunch of years ago. But again, limited wall space. Somebody else should love them as much as I do, so off they go. Check out Suomi's website. This artist is one of my favorite new finds. It's a great story. He is a DACA student. He is teaching. He's got a teaching at the University of Missouri right now. He is doing this amazing work, big installations, and he's one of the different ways of working. He's doing these. Note his name. Take his website. Look up his website. He's doing these fabulous paintings. He's saved all the documentation from his attempts to get status in this country. He was brought in as a small child. And he's doing paintings of his houseplants, very domestic, on these envelopes and packages that all the legal papers come back and forth in. Fascinating. And I originally wanted one of those for the exhibition, but they're promised elsewhere. So what these are just astounding amounts of work. They're printed paper that has been cut into very narrow strips and then woven back together. So for example, the one on the right is blue papers, and you see a little bit of the white background. Excuse me, and if you look really closely, you can see almost the fabric of the weave of the paper. Just an insane amount of work and attention and detail and perseverance. What I love most about these prints is that he told me that this was his first experience of printmaking. And he remembers waking up as a small child at his grandmother's after having had his nap on a straw mat and seeing the imprint of the straw mat on his arm. And I think the story is just fabulous.
They're really beautiful.
They're gorgeous. And how exciting to have something that like that tells such a story that's so evocative of our present situation. This is just a fun one. This is a friend. We were at Math Art together, and Christina has always had this really different way of looking at space and moving people out. And this series of paintings really struck me during the pandemic, of how we're just so separated and how we're there, but we're not, and seeing people from a distance. And I just love her paintings. Very whimsical. It's very proficient. She does lovely little enjoyable paintings of flowers and plants and people. She does big portraits of people, but the space in them is what really intrigues me. And you can't tell if these people are in a fog or whether they're cutouts or what's going on. I just think they're fascinating. Love her work. This is another one that I just love. Jim is a friend and approached me saying he wanted to start drawing. He's never had art courses before. He's never studied before. And I encouraged him and I gave him some supplies and a little bit of instruction. And he has developed this obsessive drawing style that just blows me away. He works on these and sets up a series of rules. They're very conceptual in that it's all got to be triangles and colors can't touch, et cetera, et cetera. He's also colorblind, which I think makes these even more interesting. And then spends hours working on these. And if you can imagine, these are done with inks. And if he makes a mistake anywhere, the whole thing goes in the bin and he starts over again. And again, obsessive drawing. Where these people come from, I don't know. Who would have the patience to do this? It's great. And
How did you meet him, John?
He's a friend. He's actually, true story, he was my trainer for a while. Trying to stay in shape. Just a great guy.
That's terrific.
And here we have, and Nona should speak to this also, because she worked much more with Patrick than I did. Patrick Casey is a former graduate of Mass Art. He's been through the Iowa program, as was Fifield Perez. He's running the print program at Lesley College right now. He is one of the hardest working, most focused artists I think I've ever known. He does these detailed wood carvings, just amazing work. This one was done a while ago, but his new work is equally interesting. And it had this commentary, this stinging commentary. There sometimes it can be a little graphic novelish. It can be whimsical. It can be so on. But it's this. He has this passion for nature, and it comes across in his drawing, his work. Nona, do you want to say anything else about that?
No, I think you covered it. He had a show at Galatea in the fall. I know he's on their website. He's really worth looking into. He's a marvelous artist and an extraordinary printer. Yeah,
he's just terrific, and he's the world's worst business person, self-promoter. So I encourage you to help him out and buy one of his works.
Oh yeah, he's solid.
He's great.
Yeah.
This one, Kyle, I see Kyle is in online, so Kyle might want to say a word here too. Kyle Bryant, again, former Mass Arts student living in Los Angeles now, another really masterful carver. And what he's done now, it's a little hard to see in this slide because it's flattening, but this is a 3D carved wall wood plaque. Not terribly large, 12 by 12, but such detail and such presence. Kyle, do you want to speak up? Is there anything you want to say?
Yeah, I mean, I was blessed enough to study printmaking at Mass Art. I took my first woodblock class with John in '04, and then developed a very strong relationship with the venerable Nona Hershey. Um, this piece is part of, I pursued printmaking very steadfastly, sacrificing, stability and a normal life for well over a decade. And it wasn't until about 3 years ago that I started building my pieces as sculptures, because I realized I didn't want to become a printer, or a painter rather. I just didn't have it in me, and realized I loved carving. A lot of my work is inspired by the city around me. And so this is actually a building, a house that's a few blocks from where I live. I photographed it on a walk, and I use birds because they represent safety and familiarity and home, which is something that I never really had growing up. And so this piece is simply about two birds that are very proud of the home that they have and want the whole neighborhood to know it.
Well, this piece really needs to be seen in person, because it's got a lot of three-dimensionality to it, and it very much, you can see the that your inspiration is printmaking, very much so.
Yeah, and in both of these, I think one of the things that's so exciting is again this obsessive striving for this to make it work, and the details that that so many of the artists do, this intentionality and this effort that goes into making these things, and they're just remarkable statements. Dedication.
Thank you very much.
And Kyle is doing, I hope we get to see these in person sometime, but I'm hoping Kyle is doing some big installations of bird carvings, cascading down walls and across areas, and waiting to see that.
I just had my first big bird install at a gallery in Los Angeles called Think Space, which was actually the gallery it was my goal to show with back when I was at Mass Art.
Wow.
And
That's great.
I did 56 hand-carved wooden birds all in one big installation. And if you want to see it on my Instagram, I'll leave that down in the chat.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
Please do.
So nice to see these younger artists getting a start and getting to move up.
So John, if what I want to do now is open up the chat for questions. If people want to unmute themselves to ask questions, please feel free. But Robert, Nona, and John would be happy to answer any questions you have. And I don't know if all of you have the chat features on, but people are making comments as the discussion is going on. So Nona, I'm curious, as we're waiting for some questions to come in, I'm curious if you have any interesting stories of the students you've worked with. You must, I can see it.
They're strong-minded, and they don't let you get away with anything, and they're just so exciting. Mass Art is an amazing place. There's just so much talent, and I don't know if you've ever seen our print shop, but it's 9,000 square feet, and it's a great, it's open atelier, so you can see everybody working, and there's a lot of collaboration that goes on. It's very exciting. It's great. And our, the master print program that we've done has been a great thing. So it's exciting. It's good. The students are, they don't let you get away with anything. No, when John was talking before, I remember visiting, going into the studio space of one of the students, and she was doing printing and embroidery on these incredible embroidered handkerchiefs and things that she found. And I looked at one, and it had very complicated writing on it, this magnificent antique handkerchief. And it said, "I'm going to kill that son of a bitch." And I burst out laughing. And she said, "Oh, it's a quote from you." And I'm, oh my God. So yeah, the students are unpredictable and interesting.
So there's a question for you, John. And the question is, what's the difference in your printmaking versus your painting practice?
Wow, isn't that a good one?
Well, one of the things, just before you get to that, one of the things that I say about you is that I call you the painting printmaker, because I feel like your prints are very often painted, painterly also.
Yeah, you know, for me, one of the terrific things, I'm totally ADD. I can't focus on anything longer than 10 minutes. So one of the great things for me is printmaking allows me to start and stop and work on something and put hours into it, but I can do it in pieces and segments. So I can carve a block that might take a week and then use it to print. And I might print, 2 hours on Monday and not at all on Tuesday and 8 hours on Wednesday. So it gives me this ability to move around. Painting for me is something, it requires me to really get in a different space, and I have to be more isolated and focused. And I really need the time. One of the things I like about painting, and I've got some John Walkers in the show here, who I think is masterful at this, is just moving the paint around. The fabulous ability of oil painting is the mixing of colors and textures. But you've got to have the time to do it, because you don't want your painting to dry. You've got to have a week set up where you can really come in and work on it pretty steadily to get the effects I want. So for me, that's a big difference. I always thought I was going to be a painter until I stumbled into printmaking, and that ruined my life, or changed my life, I should say. But to me, they're both equally valuable. I explore and find things in both practices.
So there's a question for Robert, and the question is, are you strictly a painter, or have you created any prints or sculpture?
I did some printmaking in college and some sculpture in college, but right now and for the last at least 40 years, all I do is push paint around. I love the textural feeling of it. I love the way the brush as it hits the canvas and then bounces off. I love the smell of the turpentine. I got music going. There's a lot going on in the studio, and I know John has asked me to think about making some prints, and I've been putting them off, but I'm going to say yes one of these days, John.
Well, that's great.
No, and Bob, his discipline is that he's in the studio every day. His paintings get worked on. He's got 3 of them going at a time, and he's working every single day. So they remain fresh and wet and working constantly.
Well, I love walking around the studio building and seeing new paintings of Robert's hanging all over the place. It's really quite wonderful. So Nona, there's a question for you. We love your paintings. Can you talk more about the process of making your clouds and what inspired you to start?
Oh, I actually started making cloud imagery when I was in a residency in Ireland at the Ballinglen Foundation. And I became fascinated with clouds. And then, and there's just fields of smoke everywhere with things burning up and all kinds of stuff. It just seemed like the right kind of imagery. What did I start now? The combination that I've been using for quite a while now is watercolor and graphite powder, which I rub on with cotton or a rag that has graphite powder on it, and gouache. And so usually I start with watercolor in a very random kind of way. I have no idea what I'm going to do. And then I kind of look at it, and cloud shapes begin to tell me where they are. And it's kind of a crazy way to work, because I can't really erase the graphite, and I can't erase the watercolor, and I can't paint the gouache over the graphite. So I kind of have to leave areas for it. So I'm sort of always at a kind of open open possibilities, and which I enjoy, strangely enough. Maybe working oneself into a corner is something that happens a lot in printmaking. No matter how experienced you are, there are surprises, things that you hadn't expected happen, and there's something sort of fun about having to do that. And so maybe the way I'm working is doing that. But I just find the evanescence of clouds absolutely fascinating, and the fact that they're so much larger than we are, and we can't control them. And
well, what's interesting in listening to the three of you talk is I get the sense that each of you let the art come to you as you're making it, rather than making, if that makes any sense what I'm saying.
It does make sense, because the element of surprise is, I think, what we're all in it for. And that element of surprise comes with the act of doing it. And so that is so important in the process. If without that surprise, the painting gets to be contrived in some way. And you can, I know John said, you can, as a student, he could, with a print, he could throw away or tear up the print. But I've torn up a lot of paintings that the element of surprise didn't work.
Yeah, I think there's a it might be a couple of seconds, it might be a total of an hour, it might be a total of a couple of days in a year, where you're just in the zone, where the piece is telling you what it wants to be, and you're just following its instructions. God only knows where that's coming from, but it makes all the drudgery of the rest of the time worth it, to have those moments where you're so tuned in, and you're just, it's as if the paper or canvas or whatever it is speaking to you, and it's telling you, this is where you have to put this color, this is where you have to put this edge, the edge has to be this way. It's kind of extraordinary, and it's fun.
So we have a question from Leonie. Did you want to unmute yourself?
I tried to write one, but it ended up being a direct message to someone else, so you'll never see it. So Bob, I'll just speak it, if I may, to say, where do you see the new work in the evolution of your earlier work? I hear what you're saying about it being spontaneous, and you don't really fully register where it's coming from. But the trajectory that we've seen is your earlier work long ago of the black tie middle class, the bourgeoisie, black bourgeoisie, through the much more lively, spontaneous, the dancing, the African rhythm paintings. Then we looked at your celebration of the second line, the wonderful, colorful paintings with all of the ritualistic aspects of that. And now this new work seems to me, because we've seen a couple of instances of your other accompanying work this year, that it's more political in a sense, that you've been deeply affected by, as we all have, by George Floyd, by the Black Lives Matter movement, and certainly what's going on now, although you'd already done the work. But where do you see that as an evolution from that earlier, more status-driven work to this, political statement?
It's a really good question, and it was difficult for me to make a transition like this, because most of my paintings are really celebrating African American life, and I was in a kind of a schizophrenic place in the studio where I was trying to make beautiful paintings of beautiful people, and it just wasn't going to happen, because everything about this George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and January 6th was just on my mind. And for almost 3 or 4 weeks, I couldn't paint at all. And then I decided that, again, I'm going to let the scribble decide. And that scribble produced about 8 new paintings. And those paintings, yes, you can see them on robertfreemanart.com. That's my website. And they're extremely different from any of the other work. of the celebration of African American life. I'm not sure how long I'm going to continue doing them, but for now, the faucet is on.
Yeah.
So one of the, just a comment I'd like to make about the gallery and our upcoming show. The next show that we're going to be doing is called Art in Quarantine. And it's going to be all a group show of contemporary artists, all reacting to things such as the Black Lives Matter movement, the pandemic, climate change, Me Too. And it's interesting that even without intentionally planning this exhibition to include themes like that, it's just sort of, you know, what is in the air now.
Yeah.
So, but Robert, I was really starstruck by Robert's new work. It's really, especially the size and the power of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's really true. And I think the other thing that's true, and Robert has expressed it very well, is all of us seek the challenge. You know, doing safe work is not interesting as an artist. You've got to challenge yourself. And whether that's, you know, the more profound reflection on current events, as Robert's been talking about, and I think it affects all of us. Some of my new prints have been very stark and less colorful and different than earlier prints. But as Nona spoke about, you know, she forces herself in the corner. She puts down marks that she can't remove, that makes you do things. And it's no fun. I always tell the students that we don't go to the circus to see people walking on tight ropes a foot off the ground. It's only when it's up in the air that it's exciting. And you got to take risks. If you're going to make art that's interesting, you got to risk ruining it every time you touch it.
Good point.
So Gary, you have a question you want to ask?
Yeah, it really flows very nicely from what John just said. I'm just curious to know, a lot of artists settle into or evolve into a certain style or a certain look. And I'm curious to know what events or what thoughts or what forces you to break from that kind of style or that look. And then I mean to the point where somebody is surprised to say, oh, that's a John Thompson or that's a Bob Freeman. What are those kind of events? Is it a vision, a discovery of a new material? I mean, I'm just curious.
I could answer that. I think boredom. I'll work on something, a series of, you know, I'm totally enamored of a particular image, window, wire, whatever it is. And I'll do that for years. And then all of a sudden, I don't want to look at that anymore. And then it's desperate. What's next? Desperate. And then you find something. I'm sure other people have a more cogent answer than I.
No, I think that's absolutely true. But one of the things, Gary, I think it's also really interesting. You know, there are artists like Philip Guston who changed styles totally, but you could still tell it was him by the way he painted and the colors and so on and so forth.
But John, I saw a show of Guston's calligraphy studies. I mean, years that he was trying to learn how to do, you know, to basically work with the brush and be able to make that brush line say exactly what he wanted. I mean, there were hundreds of them. Yeah. So anyway, sorry, go on.
So, you know, I don't know where we're going with this, but one of the things that's really interesting is, and I think it's a real artistic development, is as we mature, you can really identify work. I can look at work in a gallery across the room, in a museum, down a hallway, and you know who did it. And it can be different, and it can be exciting, and it can be challenging. Every now and then you walk up on a surprise and say, wow, this is different than what I've seen so-and-so produce. But you know, we get good at doing a certain thing. It's our accents, if you will, the way we talk. I don't know, the way it's a habit we get into, then keeps our work looking pretty consistent, that you can tell who did it.
Yeah, but I'm wondering how that tension between what you were saying earlier, John, about taking risks and pushing the envelope, and then staying with what you're comfortable with, or the technique or the style, that kind of tension.
Well, I think all of us do it. Bob talked about scraping paintings down, and there's, Gary, imagine we can be in our studios for a week working on a print or a painting or something, and just sigh and give up and destroy it. And that happens all the time. I see we have another great printmaker online, Carolyn Muscat, who's also a great educator and teacher and printer. And I know that she battles the same things. It's like, I've worked on this for a month, and I guess it's just this whole batch is going in the bin.
When my parents passed, I wanted to pay tribute to them, and I took their African art collection, and I started to illustrate their collection. And it took me 1 year to illustrate all the objects in their collection, but I realized that it was the things that they used daily, it was the things that they sat on, it was the personal items, and I ripped up 1 year's worth of work and painted what I realized I should have begun with. But sometimes that's the process, and that's what we go through.
Well, and one final question to bring it back to collecting. So there was a question from Jean, and this is to you, John, that I had posited that artists that collect were collectors as children. And so she's wondering if you were a collector of something as a child, and what might it have been?
Oh, yeah. And having no money and sort of no directions, it depended what struck my fancy. There was a collection of banks. And then when I had a little more money, I collected clocks for a while. I had I was fascinated by the workings of clocks and ticking and talking. But of course, they all went away when I went off to college. I collected, I've always been fascinated by fabrics. I adore fabrics, the weaving, the colors, the background. So there was fabric collection. Of course, there were rock collections and pressed flowers, and yeah, I started collecting art and prints when I was a kid. I would try to pick things up or talk to people to see if they'd give me a scribble. It was desperate. I just I wanted to have something other than calendar prints on the walls.
I think for myself, when I was a kid growing up and I would see the calendar with the artwork, I always wondered, how does one find this? And because it must be out there somewhere. So somehow it led me to this.
And Richard, you and I were sort of similar in that we didn't have a lot of parental guidance in the art world, and museums to me were a complete mystery. And I do want to say, I think that's one of the biggest problems we have in the art world right now, is we make art scary for people. We make a not child, certainly, but galleries should not be intimidating. Museums should be accessible. People should understand that art is not a locked world, that everybody should be able to access it.
Well, thank you, John. We are at a little after 7:30. I want to thank everyone for coming, joining us. I want to thank Nona, Robert, and John for a very exciting discussion. And I do want to remind everyone that the gallery is open now, and you're welcome to come see the show. It'll be up for, we're extending it a few weeks. So please come and see it. And it's also available online. And again, thank you all for coming.